Remember that guy, Mark Wayne Mullen? I didn't realize it. Was he a UFC fighter or something like that?
I mean, I think he
like
was in orbit somehow.
We looked into this on the last Thursday. Bender looked into this. He did.
Oh, because Bender takes that stuff very seriously.
Yes.
He was like an amateur mixed martial arts fighter in Oklahoma, and had 3 matches.
That's what it means to be a mighty man of valor.
I see. He had 3 matches. Okay.
Yeah,
he had 3.
Yeah, he had 3. I think 2 against the same opponent, but he won all of them.
Well,
yeah,
I mean,
good for him, but,
he was a big guy.
Yeah.
That's the kind of, sorry again, I had this granola bar, but
it was a short guy.
That's the kind of thing that you can do when your dad is a successful business person who hands down their business to you.
Yeah, I love to inherit a business and then become that I later sell for millions of dollars. And also,
then call myself self-made.
I wish you were with me and my wife in the truck.
I'm going to invest this into
we're farming our business,
my MMA career. It is like it's just like the Oklahoma version of like you inherit a business and then sell it and then become a playwright. But in Oklahoma, it's you become an MMA fighter.
Right.
Yeah, for three matches. Meanwhile, because of his his challenge to fight a union leader on the floor of the Senate, he's become a little bit of a cause celeb on the right. And of course, with those credentials, why wouldn't you bring him on to walk you through what's going on with the Israel-Gaza conflict? Here he is on Fox Business with Fox Business's David Assman.
Kidnapped from Israel on October 7th. They brought him right in the middle of the hospital. You could see from the video cameras and everything. So there's that. There's also the schools that are run by the UN that are essentially teaching Hamas propaganda. I mean, it's clear there's this linkage between a horrible terrorist organization and the UN, which we spend hundreds of millions of dollars on.
Well, and we see the leadership that the UN continues to put out. And you're absolutely right, David. There's no way that someone was working in that hospital or had worked in that hospital that didn't know that there was fighters coming in and out. There was a tremendous amount of construction going on underneath the building. And the same thing with the schools.
Now, let's be clear here. We know this from Ehud Barak, who was on CNN, and we know this from Tablet Magazine. We played the clip earlier in the show. That there wasn't a tremendous amount of construction going on because those were already built.
In the 80s.
They were built in the 80s by the Israelis.
Yes, Ehud Barak, former prime minister of Israel, said that on CNN. So maybe Mark Wayne needs to check in with him.
But he's making it up. I mean, he doesn't have a clue as to what's going on. So he just says, yeah, the tunnels, there must have been a lot of construction. Go ahead.
Or had worked in that hospital that didn't know that there was fighters coming in and out. There was a tremendous amount of construction going on underneath the building. And the same thing with the schools. They've got tunnels underneath the schools, and we knew what type of doctrine they were teaching. But keep in mind, too, everybody that was living in Gaza, they weren't trapped in Gaza. This wasn't a ghetto setting. Anybody that lived in Gaza was freely to move in and out of Gaza as long as they're willing to go through checkpoints. And the Palestinians that lived there, they chose to live underneath Hamas rule. If they wanted to move...
Pause it. This is just simply a lie.
Yeah.
You did not have the ability to get back into Gaza, come back and forth, because there's no passport. In the Israeli checkpoints, the Egyptian checkpoints, you did not have the ability to come and go freely. That's why there was, 18,000 actual work permits that allowed people living in Gaza to go back and forth. And to the extent that that the Palestinian people, accepted Hamas as the leadership, we should say, approval rating probably around, 35-40%. The last time there was an election was 16, 17 years ago. The circumstances were, pretty unique in terms of what Israel had done to fundamentally undercut any other political organization in Gaza or amongst the Palestinians.
And then they continued to fund Hamas and allow Qatari money to come in.
Hamas wins the election, and even like Jimmy Carter said, this was a sound, fair election. And then immediately America and Israel are like, that's actually not what we meant. And so we're not going to deal with you. And
let's also be clear that what he's arguing is, in fact, the idea that there's a country where you can come and go as you want, and therefore you're responsible for its leadership, even if half the country wasn't even alive when they were elected. This is a weaker version of the Osama bin Laden argument as to why U.S. civilians were targets of his terrorist attack. But at Mullen Ranch, that's the way they do things. Go ahead.
Freely to move in and out of Gaza as long as they're willing to go through checkpoints. And the Palestinians that live there, they chose to live underneath Hamas rule. If they wanted to move someplace else, they could have moved to Israel itself, or they could have went to the West Bank if that's what they
That is not true. That
They
is not
can't.
true.
There's no free movement.
Israel just would love the Gazans to move in.
Oh yeah, sure. Come
there-
on in. Yeah, no problem.
First of all, yeah.
It's all this was all a big misunderstanding.
You know why that's completely disproven is because when Israel was bombing, I remember this line of questioning by Mark Lamont Hill. When Israel was bombing the hell out of Gaza, continues to be, but towards the start, a lot of Israeli representatives were saying, well, they can go to Egypt, they can go other places while we ethnically cleanse the area. And Mark Lamont Hill was like, why can't they just come over the border into Israel if these are the civilians that you're saying? Because Israel doesn't want them there. Because it's an apartheid system.
allowed to.
That's why there are checkpoints. And also, there is not free movement between West Bank and Gaza.
Not at all.
It's been
Gaza is a refugee camp consists of people that by the UN says they have the right to return to the place they're dispossessed from, but those places are occupied by Israel.
Yeah, and it's documented too. People in Gaza have family in the West Bank that they haven't seen in years because it's so difficult in these checkpoints. I just looked up Mark Wayne Mullen. I did not realize that he is the second Cherokee Nation citizen elected to the Senate. There's something especially insidious about him making that argument, given, I would say, if you listen to indigenous people in this country, what they feel about what they're seeing in Palestine, they see many similarities to their own experience. But, if Mark Wayne wanted to do a thought experiment, and if he wanted to think about it a little bit more deeply, he could see maybe some of the parallels of what the Native Americans experienced in this country with what Palestinians did, but he's not engaging on that.
Well, he's just lying.
Yeah.
There, they chose to live underneath Hamas rule. If they wanted to move someplace else, they could have moved to Israel itself, or they could have went to the West Bank if that's what they chose to do, underneath Palestinian control. But they lived underneath the government, if that's what you want to say, the terrorist organization underneath Hamas. Why they were doing that, they knew they were building the tunnels underneath the street. They could see fighters easily moving across the country or across the territory. They also understood very clearly that they were an organization that was wanting to kill Israelis. And so for the hospital to say that they didn't know this, or for UN to say that they didn't know this, is a joke. It's a slap in the face because all of us understood it.
It's a lie, and our money shouldn't be going there. We don't have much time, Senator.
It's a slap in the face as opposed to the actual blowing up of their entire family.
Like the killing the Israelis thing, it's like as if Hamas says, well, they chose to live under Zionist rule and therefore they're targets. And even Hamas, and they might be lying about this, but this is what they say is we told the instructed on October 7th to go after IDF and those sorts of targets, and we regret that they took hostages and killed civilians. Now, whether you agree with that or not, all this rhetoric coming from supporters of Israel is that the civilians are an okay target for as long as they're Palestinians, and it's gross.
Yeah, and also let's not gloss over the implication that the United Nations is in cahoots with Hamas.
What they're saying is the UN is there providing aid to Palestinians, and therefore they are in league with Hamas.
But you also hear this in the criticisms of you're taking Hamas's numbers seriously about the death toll of 1,300 people, which is definitely an undercount at this point. No, it's the Palestinian Health Ministry. These are bureaucrats that have done this for many years. The region is no stranger to counting bodies. And the United Nations is backing up those numbers not because they're terrorists, but because they have been able to trust those numbers for a while, and they're doing their own verification process. Again, I sometimes hear this argument from liberal Zionists as well, which is how can you trust the Hamas numbers? You don't necessarily need to. You can trust the United Nations on this front. And then if you're still asking those same questions, there's really nothing indistinguishable from your perspective than what anti-vaxxers were saying, which are like, you can't trust these bodies. They're inherently compromised. I mean, why? You can't really provide evidence for that case. But these are independent bodies that their sole mission
They have a track
is
record
to document these kinds of things. These are experts. These are people who have dedicated their lives to this kinds of service. And they are saying that the numbers and that the figures are clear and obvious coming out of Gaza.
I mean, I think anybody, any good faith person understands that this is the case. I mean, it's probably, we have the U.S. government on record, actually, and we played this clip from a week ago saying that when the numbers were around 10,000 dead, that the U.S. government, the State Department, thinks it's probably an undercount. You don't have 60, are we up to 60 dead journalists now? Yeah. You don't have the wide range of people. Even weeks ago, Ryan Grimm had confirmed 40 members of a family of one of his sources in Gaza was dead, and then their names showed up on a list put out by the health ministry. I mean, these are all lies, and they all know it. They all know it is, and no one, frankly, I think takes that seriously anymore. The questioning of the number of deaths. It's really just simply a way of giving something to people to argue about so that they can avoid the reality of what's going on there.
As newspapers quietly change the number of dead in the October 7th attack from 1,400 to 1,200 with no explanation.